Just a short quandary as part two. I'll do part three so that the material and the open questioning of the laws can remain sort of active. I wanted to ask this question of the Zud, of the Iranian ZUHD. It's transliterated out of Farsi, I think. Um, the original, I'm not sure if the original word is a Farsi word. This notion of a sort of aesthetic um, who relinquishes the creature comforts, as it were, to, exactly in a way, um, just if you look at it by description rather than by what they say, um, the way that liberalism wants, according to Strauss, the comfortable self-preservation or individual as the telos rather than polis as the telos and our political life as the telos in Aristotle, individual as the telos in Hobbes, and desiring in Locke's version the comfortable self-preservation. And then, yeah, Trump seems to be the exemplar of that in the writ large. And then could we then say, here's Iran, like this Zud. But let's go away from the Zud for a second and give an analogy connected to the materials we were just looking at on this juxtaposition between, in the example Strauss gives, between the notion of a hermit given in Farabi's introduction to his paraphrase of the law as a hermit who has a special reputation for piety and righteousness and other qualities, which it's unspecified exactly why, but which caused the Sultan to put out an arrest warrant on him. And then going into a certain fortified town, Farabi died around 950, or if not exactly 950. Fortified town of those days. The guard would, say, identify yourself. It was somebody who's like a stranger. He doesn't recognize seeing going through the walls every day. And this hermit knew that, or this pious man, or this Zud almost. And so he contrived to make himself appear to be a drunk. And so he was singing in a sort of dissipate and woozy manner. And then the guard asked him, "Who are you?" And then he said, "So-and-so, the sage that the Sultan hates so much." And then the guard laughed and said, "Go through," because they thought he was joking. A drunk, madcap joke. But then the thing is, this, since he told the truth, okay, this stands for persecution. This stands for the writing which avoids persecution. And then also in Farabi for that not everything he said about Plato's nomoi or laws is clear. It will be clear to everyone, but some of it will remain like this figure, or this metaphor, if you like, Um, some metonymy, I'd say. I use metonymy just like, not exactly in the way. I know Lacan has a special way of using metonymy in Roman. Um, uh, the Robin Jacobson, is it? The big guy behind this linguistic theory. They have their own ways of using metonymy, but I think I just use it to mean something more complex than simple metaphor. And then therefore more like, it's complex in the sense that daily gossip, or daily, not even gossip, but just the daily way of handling things, so-called phatic speech, which doesn't necessarily really say anything, but only creates a social bond. Phatic speech is like the metonymy. It has a message born in it. It has a certain tact. It's trying to create some complex connections, or, as it were, to sustain them, perpetuate them. Metaphor is simpler. And so I suppose that's the way I'm trying to situate the femme fatale, insofar as Odysseus and Socrates are femme fatale figures. The femme fatale is prior to phatic speech. As though beyond phatic speech. More like the metaphor, okay? More simple. Whereas most times there's a deviation from phatic speech. It appears in the other direction as more complex, as Fernhofer in Balzac's The Unknown Masterpiece, and so on, as Cubism. Something so complicated it's not yet discernible in its audience is perhaps not yet born. Super metonymic. But the femme fatale is sort of in the other direction, because it's gender neutral, but it's basically the origin of the term is special time in around the time of the flaneur and all that stuff. Especially associated with Paris, where they have this strange thing that the president's palace is named after this magical afterworld of the Greeks, the Elysian Palace, Elysee Palace. The core of the country is situated on the notion and on the avenue of it, around this notion of the Blythe gods, the Olympians. Is strange, although it's probably just owed to the accident of supposedly, I think her name's Matilda, some cousin of Louis XVI, who liked to play with watches, bought it from Louis and named it that way. Countess of Bourbon or something like that. But nonetheless, there's something. It's interesting what dignity these things like Elysian Fields have yet. So I wanted to make this analogy between that hermit who at the same time the incident of the hermit stands for what the philosophers have to do in this Straussian sense, and of course also in the Mishnah Torah. That's a big place where Strauss goes into his thinking on the persecution and the art of writing. I mean, of course, persecution and the art of writing is its own book, but I think especially when he's dealing with Maimonides in the Mishnah Torah, which is a book written in this way, um, you see um, a different dimension of Strauss's thought on this writing as something where it doesn't necessarily, it says different things. If you have one kind of ears, I had this to tell you. If you have another kind of ears, I had that to tell you. This polyphonic feature of the metonymic Platon. But just abstracting from that and just taking it as an incident of the holy man as being hated by the Sultan. Why does this is not clarified. Why does the Sultan want to arrest him? Why? He's known for piety. That's the reason to arrest him. The people all spontaneously say this is the Zud. This is the pious man. This is the what is this happening? So this is I think it's interesting that the Sultan and the contrast between Sultan and that hermit to then try to clarify what exactly did that contrast amount to? Was it a tyrant as against some sense of justice? So as we're told about the difference between supposedly the two forms of liberalism, the Republican and Democrat Party in America, which is the difference is supposedly the Republicans care more about the Ghibellines, are more like Ghibellines, and the Democrats are more like Guelphs. Republicans, law and order and realism. Democrats, some kind of zeal for some sort of thing that if there were Ghibellines and Guelphs would have had its own autonomous region separated off, which would have belonged to a church or just to the university. The university literally, or which is to say physically and directly, if the most literally is such a literally, I take to mean the most usual way of using a word, like the definition 1 in the dictionary. I mean, is what literal means. It's literal. It's part of literary practice, like learned practice. If you're lettered, then you use the literal meaning. I don't accept this sort of vague shift where one just tries to say, "Oh, the literal, that means the factual." But what's the fact? That just we get into all kinds of trouble. I think originally, literal meant like basically before there were dictionaries, it meant the literate part of the society, the way they use the word, and the way they most often use it. But in any case, the current universities have literally inherited structures used by the churches, by the Christian churches, and transfigured them, but without remaining under the notion of the autonomy of the Christ and Caesar. And then the Democrats more tend to claim to be doing something in the name of Christ. So like that's exactly what this the gay pride flag is exactly that. Once it expands out into the LGBT plus, because infinite becomes seeking for ultimate perfection in some way, but according to a certain tendency, which has to do with saying that more variety of sexual experience is the most important thing, or something like that. Not or saying the fulfillment of all sexual needs is eventually to be understood as some form of basic right, or something like that. But in other words, there's a specific tact, and then if you go away from law and order and say we're for whatever the project is, then you end up with something like that. And then the Democrats more take that side, the Republicans more take the other side, but they're both bourgeois. They're both bourgeois people. And this idea, like, so in Ernst Jünger, for instance, Jünger is saying these bourgeois are the worst scum that's possible, and what all they want to do is deal all the time. They just want to wheel and deal all the time. So that especially makes me think of Trump as like the master burgermeister, wheeler, dealer, horrible person that Ernst Jünger would absolutely never invite to his salons, or however he calls them, literary salons. And who wouldn't want to go for his boorishness, and Philistinism. But it's very interesting then, if we contrast, if we think of this same, here we have the Pilgrim, pious, and then we have Trump. Here we have the Islamic culture, which thinks all boasting is obscene. So one of the reasons the Islamic culture doesn't jive that well with American culture is because they think, like the Iranian, it's sort of a species of this somehow, that they think boasting is disgusting, and this sort of anything like competition is sort of disgusting. You should go about your work, you should do it conscientiously, you should do it the best, but then let others observe who's superior and who's not superior. Don't boast about yourself. They find the American culture totally obscene and disgusting on that point. And Trump is the most representative of that. So I find that interesting in this attack on Iran. And you see it in their choices of spokespersons. Dr. Morandi notwithstanding. Morandi is a little bit supercilious, but the ones that they send out as the ambassadors and so on, but I suppose that's the usual quality of an ambassador, to be, if not unctuous, somehow, I don't know, primarily pacific somehow. So yeah, I think there's some thoughts to work with there, but and I'll just end it with one more. Let me reiterate this point. Like, if you have a simple move from monarchy, as it were, monarchy to patriotism, so that you're saying the word subjects. And I think here's where Deneen is sort of complicated in a way, because he's saying, yes, we like getting rid of monarchy, we like that we're no longer subjects, we like that we're patriots now, or he thinks of them as aristos now, an elite aristos. He would like that the patriots are an elite aristos who have their commonwealth rather than subjects of a king and a kingdom. He likes that. So in that sense, Deneen he's against the Middle Ages, which is interesting vis-a-vis Dugin. Because he's in favor of individual choice in some way, but he just thinks the individual choice will be towards having some kind of aristos class, or some kind of elite class. I think this is I don't know what to do with that, because we already have that. One thing, we already have that. That's what the Democrats and the Republicans are. Just two sides of this elite governing bourgeois class, and then Trump is just a special sort of exemplum of it, or of one part of it. I guess Obama was already the exemplum of this sort of false piety and just out and out wickedness under this. A man wreaks havoc in several countries, destroying whole domains, as it were, Syria, Libya, and then he goes around giving speeches, taking money for giving speeches and giving people advice. It's a totally obscene figure. I think that's what the Democrats are like, and I think Trump is probably more like what the Republicans are like. It's just total anything, any lie will do, anything, absolutely no belief in decency or law. There's not a question. There's absolutely no intellectual self-respect, and therefore absolutely no respect for law or for justice. But always the outward show of it, because it's you're supposed to do that, and you have to save face, and you have to this and that. You have to keep your reputation and so on. But within that, let me just make one more reflection, which is, I think one interesting point in this question of Strauss and law is that there's in one sense there's an evolutionary content to revelation or prophecy itself, in this way that Strauss is analyzing it here. So but I'll just give the most obvious point, which is, of course, that the New Testament is meant to be the beginning of a new time, and actually that's where we do put the year 1 is according to this opening up of this the Christian Aragnus, and which, according to Heidegger, shows that time is not a matter of Aristotelian calculation in terms of the shadow clock, because the moment it begins is not a quantifiable duration or something like that. It's something like Christ saying on the cross. This is one thing that people don't like to go into, because probably too much theology is built on it, but probably what Christ actually said on the cross, and that maybe it was the Septuagint that messed it up, was the Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, which is Aramaic, has this word which sabachthani apparently is the culprit, because it could be interpreted differently, whether it's Aramaic or whether it's Hebrew, and through some kind of arguments which I'm not totally clear on, it's said that probably what this said is just like when I suppose it was Paul that said, or no, it was Jesus himself, right? It said, I came not to us overcome the Mosaic law or whatever, but to fulfill it, not to break the law tablets of Moses, but to fulfill it. So I think he's probably said the same thing on the cross, which is, my God, you have fulfilled me, or why have you fulfilled me, something like that, rather than what's in all the theology, which is why have you forsaken me, and who created so much fervorous meditations over. This fulfilling, it's sort of like, so the prophecy or revelation then from God then didn't come all at once. So that's funny. There's actually a history of revelation. And of course, much later on, Islam comes around and says, here we have even better version. So that's already this type of movement, which can be construed as against sort of the natural version, not against natural law, not against Strauss's natural law version, but against sort of a Aristotelian version, which points back to the Solon version we were talking about. Because Solon came in after Draco and supposedly sort of ameliorated or softened the legal system and brought in some new institutions. So supposedly, yeah, we would have all these different dimensions of historical transformation, but these are all empirical in the sense that, yeah, they happened at a certain time. People were born, some people were born before the revelation, some people were born after it, but then likewise with these other factors, those could all be subsumed under Hegel's system, because then he says the mind of the people, or the Geist of the people, amounts to somebody was born before this type of revelation. St. Paul is saying that the Galatians 3:14, but in any case, the one where he says that male and female, rich and poor, and Jew and Gentile are all the same. And so these are the things that are in the public mind, according to Hegel. They come at a certain point, but Hegel just tries to say they didn't just come out in an automaton way, as Aristotle calls it, but they came, it turns out the automaton is actually the teleology of God at work. So chance turns out actually to be universal history. But there seems to be some confusion over where to place this doctrine. So because the other version would be to say it's more empirical, to where von Goethe's version and the German historicist jurists, what they say is, as long as the conditions of life are changing, and they are always changing, and more rapidly now than in former times, then you always need a new settlement. So it's sort of the there's one version of historicism where changes are so fast that you can't ever hope to have this settled sea Solon version where the winds subside, because even within the theoretical points you have to change depending on if there's radical changes in the conditions, such as most people being emancipated from farm work, agricultural work due to machinery coming in or something like that, which is part of the 19th century especially suffered from that. There's so much changes like that all the time. Even the principles must change, and then you get this other legal situation. But on the other hand, the Hegelian version, it makes history encroach on nous. That's the real point. It basically, Hegel gets rid of nous. So it happens at a different level. It happens at the level of sort of decapitation strike on the tradition. But then you say, was Hegel just stupid or something? Or isn't it that we're actually observing something different than what Aristotle and Plato and so on observed? So we have to keep in touch with everything that's still active in the tradition, which then becomes, so that's what I say about Heidegger. He doesn't really want to go into deep time, except that it shows up already in what we're dealing with. Whereas Nietzsche is much more willing to go to the infinity. So there is a contrast there, and in part 3 we'll try to think further about what we can get out of looking at this full sweep of the Western law and of our basic concepts connected to the law, especially like justice or Tico K K K Ta Tico Te Keta.